Hi everyone, Sayer G here, checking in for a weekly broadcast. I just wanted to see if we had any question and answers, and also to share something that came up for me this week while I was doing a little research. And so let me show you this real quick, share my screen. All right, so let me do this right here. All right, so if you go to Google, and you type in anti-maskers and you type in R, you'll see that these suggestions come up here. Okay, these are called autocomplete phrases. They don't like to use the word suggestion, but basically what you're seeing here is what you would assume to be suggestions that are being put there because others are searching for them, right? That's when you go in, you see autocompletes, you see these suggestions. So let's go ahead and see if, in fact, there's any indication looking at another Google product called Google Trends that, in fact, this is what is being searched, okay? Anti-maskers are selfish, insane, murderers, psychopaths, big babies, narcissistic. Very interesting. So Google Trends, and let's just see what, in fact, is being searched. So anti-maskers are, let's see again. What's the top suggestion? Selfish. How many people are actually looking for that? Well, looky here. Your search doesn't have enough data. So when this happens, I've been doing this for over a year, trying to figure out when statements are being made here on Google Autocomplete, whether or not they reflect actual search traffic. And in fact, I don't see any indication, of course, that that's happening. So how about anti-maskers are insane? Same thing. Okay, even the whole thing, like anti-maskers, does that remind you of anti-vaxxers? Because that's actually very similar to what had been done previously with dehumanizing. Here, I'll find this, anti-vaxxer hate speech. I did a whole article before this came up on vaccine extremism, hate speech, and the well-beaten path towards genocide. And the same thing was being found here, was in fact, do I have it? No, okay. The search suggestions were really dehumanizing, and here, I'll show you. This was actually Bing, so it's not just Google. So look at the suggestions through Microsoft's Bing. Of course, we know who founded Microsoft. Anti-vaxxers kill. That's basically what they're saying. People are searching where in fact it's neurolinguistically programming through so-called auto-suggestions, phrases, right, that increasingly target marginalized groups with what may amount to hate speech or inciting violence, actually, okay? When I actually look to see what volume, oh, here's another one. Anti-vaxxers are irrational, okay? Anti-vaxxers are murder, are killers. And then you look at one of the ways you can find out what actually is being searched, and you see there's no volume there for those. So you see what's happening, right? It's a form of mind control. Let's actually go back to my original article on this a while ago. Green Med Info, mind control, Google. See, it's amazing they haven't scrubbed this off the internet, right? But this one here, how Google uses mind control tactics to promote pro-vaccine industry propaganda. Okay, we've been reporting on this for a while. And of course, search engine manipulation effect was identified back in 2015 by Richard Epstein as potentially determining about 20% and up to 80% in some demographics of voters' decisions on who they're going to vote for. So when you think about it, the moment you're actually, hey guys, the moment you're actually about to search for a topic and you're vulnerable, you don't know what it is, what do? You go search it, i.e. you go Google it. And that's the moment that you are extremely vulnerable to suggestion, because you're ostensibly going to Google because you believe in these algorithms, you know, machine learning. It's fair. You're not assuming some, you know, evil troll in the background is programming in suggestions for you because they want you to vote for a specific candidate, or start thinking that people that don't wear masks, for example, maybe they have a medical condition, they want you to start thinking that they're murderers, psychopaths, selfish, narcissistic. And so that's one of the things that keeps coming up in my searches, is the fact that they are trying to program us and basically energize the opposition between humans in any way they can. It could be sex, it could be class, it could be gender, it could be religious belief, it could be pretty much any topic you can think of that will divide us. That is what they're trying to foment. And this is actually, I think, something that should be brought attention to, because at this point, once again, there's no indication that anyone is actually searching for these terms, but the moment you put it into people's minds as such, you are actually doing something which is called mind control. It's a way of trying to get thoughts and behaviors to change, which we've seen in the past year. There's been quite a lot of this, okay? So back in 2018, I was doing searches to try to find out, okay, what are they doing? What are they trying to get us to think? Holistic medicine is dangerous, is anti-scientific, is fake. And once again, when I looked at the actual volume of searches on Google Trends, there was no indication that anyone was searching for that. So in this case, look, they're putting in Google wants you to think anti-vaxxers are burdening the economy. We're bad. We're burdening the economy. Once again, no one is searching for that term. And that is the power of the search engine manipulation effect. In fact, Epstein concluded, that this was the largest behavioral phenomena or effect ever observed. That is how powerful Google is, okay? Here's another example. HPV vaccines are safe for your child. They are auto-completing that when you're searching for HPV vaccines, okay, are safe. And here you go. There's no indication that that's actually happening. Here's another one. Why vaccines are good, important, necessary, safe, beneficial, blah, blah, blah. And then you go and look what people are actually searching for, why vaccines are good, why vaccines are bad. They're at least equally as searchable, or as many people searching. And again, they're not putting that suggestion in. So this is an example of how they are intentionally manipulating people into, again, thinking and doing certain things. This was another interesting one. Mandatory vaccines in Florida. Okay, because they're really targeting Florida, they were trying to reproduce a SB 277-like bill here called SB 64 through Senator Lauren Book, which would strip religious and even medical exemptions outside of a medical review board. So they're targeting certain areas. Okay, this one was really good. Vaccines cause adults. Really? Really? You think people are really searching vaccines cause adults, or are they typing in vaccines cause autism? Yeah, it looks like they're actually looking for vaccines cause autism. And by the way, this is based on relative search volume. So you take every possible search and you compare the phrases and terms, and this is the relative volume. So you're getting orders of magnitude higher searches for vaccines cause autism versus vaccines cause adults. So again, I encourage people to look at Dr. Robert Epstein's work. It's really profound. And it pretty much showed that elections were being manipulated through the use of this technology. So let me see, stop sharing. Okay. So yeah, that's what I would say. Aren't these false suggestions actually inciting violence themselves? And that's a really good point. And keep in mind that this is no small thing, because when you look at the well-trodden steps to genocide, we should all be familiar with this. In fact, if you want to look further into the topic, go check out an interview done by my colleague, co-founder of Stand for Health Freedom, with Vera Shiraz, former Nazi Holocaust survivor, who goes in depth about how this operation happening around us now is exactly like what we saw in Germany. So when we're looking at things like inciting violence, and we're thinking about how these things work, I think it's important that we actually look at history and the well-trodden steps towards genocide. So here's a good example. Start with number 1, classification of people, divide them into us and them. Okay, so what we're saying is, if you look around and you look at the politicizing of pretty much everything, us and them is the whole key. That's number 1. Okay, symbolization. People are forced to identify themselves. Well, we have many examples of that. Presently, you wear your ideology not on your sleeve, but on your face. Do you believe that COVID-19, as they're describing it, is so deadly that we need to wear a mask constantly in public and social distance? So it's the symbolization is so literal now and so observable. It's very clear who us and them are. Okay, you couldn't create a more literal expression of it. Discrimination. People begin to face this systematic discrimination. Oh, yeah, well, that's why we call it bio-apartheid. There's a segregation occurring between elements of society because some people are not willing to don the mask, the signal of submission. For some, it's a virtue signal, because they have a completely different view when it comes to who's responsible for your health. Is it myself through my choices? Or is it because I may or may have been exposed to an invisible viral particle that, depending on the day and week, we're being told is in a specific region or of a certain variant, because we trust that the CDC and scientists that, again, are collusion with industry can tell us what our risk is. They even in the mainstream media project when we should be afraid. The CDC last week said, you will need to be really afraid in March when the new variant comes. They're like already planting seeds of when they want us to be afraid. Dehumanization, step 4. People equated with animals, vermin, or diseases. Now this is a key point, because if you look at Giorgio Agamben's work, the Italian philosopher and activist, the basic premise of his Homo Sacer series is that basically we are becoming like animals, and that is what this agenda is all about. We are being reduced to, go get your anal swab at this point, or you can't have access to basic services without which you'd be dead, literally. I mean, we are getting to the point where we're being treated like animals, we're being tagged, we're being tracked, vaccinated, treated literally like animals. And the point is that when we look at each other through the lens of, are they within 6 feet of us, or are they wearing a specific physical apparatus on their body to make us feel safe? We are already not just in a prison, but this is literally like livestock. And of course, what image is conjured and is key to Giorgio Agamben's body of work is the concentration camp. It is literally the archetype of modernity, is this concentration of certain segregated elements of the population into camps, treated like animals and exterminated. That's why step 4 is dehumanization. People equated with animals, vermin, or diseases. Can you go imagine what's happening right now? Is that by definition, your body, which happens to have a microbiome and a virome, is now equated with disease. That you are disease, and not only any disease, but a disease so deadly that if you're not contained, the entire world is at risk. Do you see how they have weaponized the entire world against the individual, right? This is what the greater good is all about, right? This notion that we must sacrifice the individual for the greater good. When I started getting deep into the literature on the history of the rise of Hitler, what was so fascinating was that in certain talks he gave, or speeches, whatever you want to call them, he likened himself to the Robert Koch of politics. Robert Koch is the one who came up with the basic postulates to prove in theory, that viruses and germs cause disease. And in fact, in the window of COVID 1984, not a single one of those postulates have been fulfilled. In other words, they have never proven that they've isolated a particular pathogen from patient 0 in Wuhan and those supposedly that were infected with this same viral particle, and also proven that that viral particle doesn't also exist in healthy individuals. That's postulate number one. You have to do that in order to establish that you have even identified a singular cause of disease. And by the way, this whole notion of an asymptomatic carrier implies that there are healthy carriers of this, quote, pathogen. Coronavirus was already known to have at least 100 variants. And now we know that COVID-19 and coronavirus particles are indistinguishable from exosomes, extracellular vesicles. So for there to be reified this narrative around one singular viral particle from Wuhan spread across the planet, requiring everyone shut down social, economic activity and behavior a year later is completely insane when you really look at the basic premise. But what this essentially does is it gives totalitarian power to a very small group of individuals that are using it to roll out the largest wealth and power transfer in human history. That is what is going on right now. So the surface narrative is that we are animals, we're deadly, we're going to infect one another, we need to be neutralized, we need to be concentrated in specific places within our own homes under lockdown, a term which actually came from sort of active shooter scenarios, and that we will probably have to eventually put people into camps. Now look at Canada. They're announcing that if you have a negative COVID test, then you get to go and quarantine yourself at a place of your choosing. But if you have a positive PCR test, which doesn't really confirm anything if you know what PCR is, go ask the creator of it, Kary Mullis, who received a Nobel Prize for its discovery, who himself said that you can't identify specific viruses with PCR. Instead of it being capable of finding a needle in a haystack, it creates a haystack from a needle depending on how many yield cycles you execute, which even the World Health Organization post-Biden election now is saying is that there is an issue here with PCR. So we are now at a point where humans are being characterized as animals. So that's all of us, guys, all right? Whether you submit or not to the relatively sort of like, it's like a mark of the beast type of concept, a COVID immunity pass or vaccine, will determine whether you get to interact with human society and be basically categorized as human. It's ironic given they're injecting transhumanistic technology into people, i.e. mRNA, but those quasi-human or post-human individuals will now be able to engage with this society they're trying to create. Now, those who resist will be, by implication, by definition, be described as subhuman, and they'll be segregated. It'll be a form of bioapartheid. Again, the more people that become aware of the agenda and resist, the better. So we are at stage 4, dehumanization, or are we further? Stage 5, organization. The government creates specific groups, police or military, to enforce the policies. Yeah, unfortunately, I think we're past stage 4, guys. This is a great example. What did the Pentagon just announce this week? They're going to work with FEMA, using as many as 10,000 troops initially to distribute and administer vaccines. The Pentagon is going to be involved. Operation Warp Speed, military operation. This is what's going on, folks, is the complete indistinction merger of the military and medical industrial establishments, ironically being orchestrated by individuals, albeit puppets, like Bill Gates, literally saying, remember early on, he said, well, we're going to have to wait till this vaccine I happen to be heavily invested in is ready before the lockdown is lifted. This gentleman is right now directing somehow military within sovereign states to enforce policies that are predicated on the dehumanization of those who do not submit to transhumanistic experimental technologies, i.e. mRNA vaccines. Step 6, polarization. The government broadcasts propaganda to turn the populace against the group. Well, we've seen this for quite some time. In fact, this entire article is about that, right? Is about how so-called anti-vaxxers are actually being attacked. This was before COVID. There's an example of a child actually being pushed, right? It's very scary. This was before COVID-19. So are we seeing that? The propaganda being broadcast to turn the populace against the group? Of course. Well, Agreement Info has the distinction of being identified as a super spreader of misinformation, I assume for discussing aspects of history that are now looking like they want to repeat themselves. But this is what's happening, is they are taking those who dissent or believe they have the right to express their opinion, especially on topics concerning their bodily sovereignty, and those individuals are being shut down. The active president of the United States was shut down on his Twitter account, and then the White House Twitter account recently. That's the president of the United States. So if ever there was an example of the government shutting down aspects of its own government because they don't want so-called propaganda, right? Or they don't want questions around safety or efficacy to come up, because again, this is a military operation, step 5. It's now. It's practically a miracle I can broadcast this to you now, which is why I don't know if we have Telegram followers on this broadcast, but you're welcome to join. I should probably actually send a link. I haven't really been doing that. These are just folks that happen to be on
Welcome to
Facebook
join.
or YouTube. So let me just send this over real quick to our group. Live stream happening now, so that people can go ahead and ask questions or participate. So, vaccine extremism. All right. 7, preparation, official action to remove, relocate people. Well, so if you are not aware already, on Agreement Info, we reported on the so-called green zones listed on a page on, I wonder if they've scrubbed it from the internet. That's interesting. On Green Med Info, we reported on these camps, green zones. Oh, that's right. It was in relation to predictive programming and the Songbird film. So what we have here, okay, first is a discussion around this highly disturbing movie that's now out, which was the only one allowed to be filmed during the lockdown in LA initially. And this film basically is a form of predictive programming. This is Alan Watts. Wow, talk about someone who was ahead of his time. Predictive programming is a subtle form of psychological conditioning provided by the media to acquaint the public with planned societal changes to be implemented by our leaders. If and when these changes are put through, the public will be familiarized with them and will accept them as natural progressions, thus lessening possible public resistance and commotion. Okay, so remember these terrible images coming out of China that scared the hell out of people and basically justified the lockdown of the country, and all these executive orders that are mostly still being executed around the world. Here in the United States, completely suspending our Constitution, completely sci-fi. Well, it turns out that a Gates-funded Chinese company, okay, is behind the film, believe it or not, direct ties to it. And it's not that, exceptional that Gates would be indirectly or directly funding anything these days. But the point is that in this terrifying thriller, COVID-23, it's mutated, right? And it's the 4th year of lockdown. And guess what? They're quarantine camps known as Q zones. Isn't that interesting? In fact, it's quite literal. And so this sounds like science fiction, right? Who would ever come up with such a crazy idea? Very interesting. Don't forget, CIA Operation Mockingbird was all about taking over the media to do this kind of dissemination. So you have, of course, these images of these military involved in the enforcement of COVID rules. And then here you go on the CDC's own website. I'm surprised I haven't scrubbed it yet. Updated July 26th, 2020. Interim operational considerations for implementing the shielding approach to prevent COVID-19 infections in humanitarian settings. The shielding approach aims to reduce the number of COVID-19 COVID-19 cases by limiting contact between individuals at higher risk of developing severe disease, high risk, and the general population. High-risk individuals would be temporarily relocated to safer green zones established at the household, neighborhood, camp sector, or community level, depending on the context and setting. They would have minimal contact with family members and other low-risk residents. You can go deep into this document, okay? Some of the precedent for this is in really disturbing areas, like places like in Africa, for example, where they set up these massive camps. Okay, so I go into detail here on Greenman Info as to what they're talking about. So we've seen in Canada discussion around this, setting up of these camps. Okay, so in the green zones, they would be monitored and evaluated with dedicated staff to monitor adherence to protocols and potential adverse effects or outcomes due to isolation and stigma, as well as, if feasible, to minimize movement in and out of green zones. Oh, look at this. Men and women would be isolated separately. That's great, right? If you have a wife, perhaps, or a husband that's been forced in a camp with you. So-called high-risk minors would be accompanied into isolation by a single caregiver who will also be considered a green zone resident in terms of movements and contacts with those outside the green zone. High-risk individuals will be responsible for cleaning and maintaining their own living space and facilities. Sounds like slave labor. This may not be feasible for persons with disabilities or decreased mobility. It looks like yeah, this was actually scrubbed. Oh my God, this was actually discussing some of this predictive programming in Canada. Wow. So why am I bringing that up again? It's because of the article I wrote here a while ago. This is before COVID, on vaccine extremism, hate speech, and the well-beaten path towards genocide, discussing the abuse, physical as well as other forms of so-called anti-vaxxers, people that, for example, might question vaccine safety, and then looking at how we are repeating history and how dehumanization is a fundamental part of the 10 stages of genocide. And we're at number 6 here, polarization. The government broadcasts propaganda to turn the populace against the group. 7, preparation, official action to remove or relocate people. So are we at 6? Are we at 7? 5? Where are we? Well, I would highly encourage people out there listening to join standforhealthfreedom.com. Sign up for the free newsletter. You'll get action alerts, and you will be part of a growing grassroots movement. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people that have used the tools on Stand for Health Freedom to directly impact their elected officials. This is the moment for us to stand up and make sure that our voices are heard and that we use the system available to us while it still exists to push back against an agenda that looks extremely dark. 8, persecution, beginning of murders, theft of property, trial, massacres. Okay, let's pray to God this doesn't happen anywhere in the world, but we are clearly moving forward towards something that is very disturbing. Extermination, wholesale elimination of the group. It is extermination and not murder because the people are not considered human. Well, in this case, it's because of number 4, dehumanization, people equated with animals, vermin, or diseases. If you can redefine a human as a threat to all other humans due to the fact that they have a body which contains exosomes and nanoparticles and viral particles, you've just basically destroyed what was formerly our definition of a human, which was natural, born into the world for good reason, able to live in the world without masks or being injected or forced into certain types of quarantine just so that we could survive as a species. This is what's descended upon us. Clearly, anyone with eyes to see can see that we have been redefined as vermin, as vectors of disease, and this is a continuation and transmogrification of 9/11. 20 years later, it's been redefined and it's been disseminated globally. Now all humans are dangerous. And this is also part of, if you look at it, the UN 2030 goals, is that humanity is being redefined as a disease, a blight upon the planet. And there's another example of it, another way for there to be segregation, division between groups that are then set against one another so that the very architects of this are never visible, are never called out for having been involved in creating the circumstances that are so distracting. And then you have denial. The government denies that it has committed a crime. What do you think the CDC whistleblower affair was all about? Where Thompson, a senior scientist, blew the whistle on the CDC, saying they covered up very clear indication that vaccines, MMR, were causing increased risk of autism in African-American children, 267% increased risk. That's a cover-up. How many times has this happened? How many times has there been a indication that there has been a cover-up when it comes to the vaccine agenda, thimerosal being the most clear an example of this. So unfortunately, step 10's already happened. So it's not like the progression towards step 10 in the case of COVID-19 isn't a possibility. But I wanted to point this out to you because once again, for those who have just joined this, I want you to quickly see that when I was searching for some keywords here, look, anti-maskers, as if there is such a thing. It's like they created anti-vaxxers. How about someone doesn't want to toxify their body or suppress their oxygen when they know, in fact, the World Health Organization, the CDC documents and guidance initially said that masks may increase the transmission of community-acquired respiratory illness because they act as fomites. They accumulate biological debris and can transmit disease if one believes in the conventional model of viral contagion. So even they acknowledge absolutely this is not based on science. It's not safe. It's not effective to wear masks. Now they're telling us to wear 2-3 masks. But look at what they're putting into people's minds. Anti-maskers are selfish. Can you see that? Insane, murderers, psychopaths, big babies, narcissistic. It's really creative, whoever was over there in the Google's mind control department to put those ideas into people's heads. And then what are the actual search volumes on things like this? Oh, do you think anyone's really searched this? Anti-maskers are murderers? First of all, it's a search engine. So do you think people are going anti-maskers are murderers, putting statements of fact or opinion into the search engine? Absolutely not. That's why there's no indication that any search of any kind like that has occurred. Now, back when I was calling out the same thing with anti-vaxxers, it was like our murderers, right? They were putting that literally in. They've taken it off because I think they were called out sufficiently. But here's another example where they are manipulating people into hating one another and potentially inciting violence. This is at least hate speech, and this is exactly what needs to stop, and we need to call it out. So that's one of the things I wanted to point out to you guys today. Thanks. Okay, so cool. We have telegrammers here for sure, and okay, just seeing if I missed any questions. Yeah, I know, right? The manipulation is really bad. Okay. Okay. So anyway, I wanted to jump in, say hi, share this, and I will probably be back on not far from now. I just wanted to jump on real quick while I could.